In this lecture, we examine gender inequality. We'll start by distinguishing between sex and gender, but first, a story from the news. Catherine McKenna is a cabinet minister in the Liberal government of Justin Trudeau. 3 days after her election in 2019, here's what was spray painted on the window of her campaign office. Abuse toward McKenna had amped up after she became Canada's environment minister, implemented an unpopular carbon tax, and was tagged as Climate Barbie or Barbie on social media. Here's the result of some interesting research looking at Twitter references to McKenna as Barbie and the timing of the carbon tax. You can see where the graph peaks is the day the carbon tax was introduced. What's interesting and extremely troubling about the abuse directed against McKenna is that it never would have been aimed at a male cabinet minister. Not just the Barbie insult, but the other insults are directed at her are specifically and directly against her as a female. So, welcome to this tour of a gendered world. What Catherine McKenna's ordeal illustrates is the degree to which our world is structured by gender norms. And when conventional standards about masculine or feminine roles are challenged, informal sanctions take place. For instance, when a woman who happens to be blonde becomes a powerful cabinet minister, she is on the receiving end of anti-female abuse. Here's a quotation from American sociologist Richard Schaefer. Gendered practices in organization are an integral part of our social world, so much so that we may take them for granted and only take notice when they deviate from conventional behavior and expectations. In other words, like so many other familiar aspects of our social world, we only notice the existence of gender norms when they are violated. Of course, rigid ideas about gender hurt both men and women, but in societies like ours that are patriarchal, women are much more victimized than men. Before we go any further, it's really important for us to understand a key distinction between sex and gender. So, sex refers to your anatomy and your genetic makeup. In other words, sex differences are biological. Now, gender. Gender involves your lived experience of being male or female and behaving according to masculine or feminine standards. And you can see here we've got photos of a masculine icon. That's Arnold Schwarzenegger as a much younger man. And in the bottom left we have Barbie. Unlike sex, which is biological, gender differences are socially determined. Notice we're saying here on screen, for the most part. That's because the jury is still out on whether there is any genetic basis for gender differences. In the meantime, the evidence is clearly on the side of the social construction of gender differences. Gender gives us a powerful lens on two sociological concepts that we have already studied: socialization and social roles. So let's look first at socialization through the lens of gender. Here we can examine agents of socialization in terms of the parts they play in reinforcing or resisting conventional gender ideas. Much research by sociologists and psychologists has demonstrated how all of us, female and male, are shaped or confined by conventional gender socialization. What drives gender socialization is the reproduction of gender roles, taken for granted assumptions about how we're expected to behave as women or men. So we can talk about conventional femininity, attributes that we expect of women: attractiveness, supportiveness, enthusiasm, receptiveness to men. And we can also talk about conventional masculinity, a very different set of attributes that we tie to men: strength, athleticism, assertiveness, and aggression. By the way, make sure you check out the mini lecture on toxic masculinity. One final look back at the Canadian politician Catherine McKenna and the specifically sexist abuse that she has suffered as a powerful cabinet minister. Viewed through a gender lens, you can see how she has gotten under the skin of people who like to see women in more traditional roles.